The Minivan is a really old keyboard and layout that ran time and time again. The man behind the van keyboard/evangs, has been a relatively controversial figure in the community, often attacked for prices that do not seem competitive, not listening to community feedback, as well as the infamous attempt to raise $500,000 on Kickstarter for a new profile of keycaps. By some turn of events, I ended up with 2 minivans and a Kumo pre-order on Kickstarter. You can read through the page yourself to get an idea, but to sum it up, it took 13 months to deliver and contributed to the ultimate demise of the van keyboard store. The Kumo was advertised as a low-cost variant of the Minivan that uses an injection-molded polycarbonate case rather than the usual CNC aluminum one. The $150 kit includes everything you need to get up and going, including the cable. This is a much easier pill to swallow than previous offerings, which was about $200 for just the case and PCB. The board comes in a box that's very much in the style of the van keyboards. Inside is the case, the PCB, switches, keycaps, a cable, and some parts. The cable is pretty interesting since both ends use right-angle connectors. The USB-C side looks kinda goofy when plugged into the board. The included rubber feet are really large and transparent. When installed, you see the adhesive pattern, which is kind of ugly. There's really not much to talk about in terms of design. It's just the same old flat tray mount rectangle, but this time in clear plastic. Believe it or not, there have been multiple iterations of this rectangle design, and this one sports a chamfer around the top and bottom edges. On the bottom is this indent where you can place the included sticker. There are also 2 holes in the rear corners where you can use cone feet for elevation. The USB Type-C cutout is located between the 2 right rear corner keys and is relatively tight. The injection molded polycarbonate is almost clear, which isn't something you find in a typical PC offering. You can see the PCB through it, which has some neat geometric patterns. I think the board looks fine. I do wish the case was a little more opaque. Transparent electronics are cool when they show off complex internals, but a keyboard's internals are visually very simple, so this is just kinda boring. The included keycaps are XDA profile PBT that's been dye sublimated. The thickness is just over 1mm, and the surface is reasonably textured. Kinda feels like a slightly damp piece of printer paper. Some of them had black or white powdery residue on them, but they are easily scratched off with fingernails. The majority of the surfaces have these light spots that shine when lit from certain angles. They could be scratches from shipping in bags, but no such issue exists for my set of XDA canvas, which also shipped in bags. On that topic, the molding marks on the undersides are different, so I'm inclined to think that these are not produced by the people behind Mastrop's XDA sets. I've seen these scratches on cheap AliExpress caps before, and I think they're manufacturing defects. While they aren't obvious unless in harsh light, it's still noticeable from time to time, and is especially disappointing that most keys are like this. These have Japanese sublegends. The van keyboard seems to have some relationship or member in Japan, so this is fine, but I absolutely hate when people use foreign sublegends just because it looks cool, so this is a big negative for me. The colors themselves are pretty inoffensive, and I kinda like the icons on modifiers, so that's that. Since the PCB supports a couple different layouts, there are also a couple extra keys. Be advised that the most dense layout supported by the PCB is not physically covered. On the topic of keycaps, there seems to be some kind of beef between TVK and keyset designers to the point that common GMK sets will purposefully leave out compatibility for the Minivan, something to keep in mind. Being a tray mount case, the only interesting thing about the build of this board is the fact that it's injection molded polycarbonate. Polycarbonate has been gaining popularity in the community in the last year or so, but I don't recall seeing any injection molded ones before this. Usually cases are milled from a solid brick of the stuff rather than being molded like a keycap. This means no more machining marks like we saw in the E6.5, but rather molding marks. The resulting finish quality is actually very high. The surface of the inside is glossy, which I don't think you can get with unpolished machined polycarbonate. The case itself is not as bendy as you might expect, but moderately stiff, which brings us to the issue of warping. Like PBT keycaps that deform left and right for longer keys, this case is severely warped. Some parts of the case are pretty straight, notably towards the rear, but the front of the keyboard has a major bend on pretty much every axis. In an update, TVK said case warping was one of the many reasons for the Kickstarter's delays. It looks like some shipped units were unable to escape this. I don't think it actually affects the usability at all, but conceivably the bowing could be bad enough that the PCB bends with it, making keys seem off. The other thing about the case is that there are these tiny little splotches that kind of look like pen ink. They don't really look removable, so that's a shame. The PCB is Hotswap with KL sockets. It offers multiple layouts by stacking them vertically in some locations. This means that some of your switches are going to be mounted sideways. For the ones where the LED cutout is facing away from you, the keycaps are ever so slightly misaligned with the rest of the row. Not super noticeable, but one of those things you can't unsee. It has support for PCB mounted stabilizers, but I didn't find them necessary for thumb keys this small. The included stabilizers look like GMK clip-ons to me, but I'm no expert. On the top left corner, there are 3 RGB LEDs. These can be used to signal which layers are active, useful for a keyboard of this size. By default, the kit does not come with a plate, though it was offered as an option. What results is kind of a haphazard situation with the switches. They're probably going to come out with your keycaps as you pull them, and sometimes they will become partially pulled, making the keys look misaligned. Further, not all switches have the same size PCB mounting pegs, which means those with small ones will end up super loose. Gatoron is known to have thicker alignment pins than others, so they fit really securely, but the included PCB mount Kale Pro switches have looser legs which don't do much. Further, for the majority of the sockets, the switches are facing the wrong way with the LED cutout pointed away from you. This means that for some switches, especially those with full 4mm travel, GMK and other cherry profile keycaps will collide with the top of the switch housing, making an inconsistent sound and feel. The switch orientation is weird because the PCB doesn't even offer an option for in-switch LEDs, so I don't really see why they needed to do this. There may have been some conflict near the USB port, but other Hotswap PCBs get away with this by flipping just the 2 closest ones. Perhaps this wasn't even a consideration as this was offered as a complete kit, and XDA keycaps don't have this problem, but this just seems like one of those times the Van Keyboards is out of touch with the community. Another oversight was with the optional carrying case. This is 2 pieces of plastic that are held together by an elastic band. They too seem to be injection molded and feel pretty good in the hand, but are completely unpadded on the inside. So when putting the keyboard in, there's going to be plastic on plastic contact, and depending on the hardness, one of them is going to be scratched. I didn't try it after the reports, but other people say that it is the keyboard that gets scratched, which is a shame. The typing experience on the Kumo is ordinary. It's tray mounted with 7 mounting points, distributed seemingly at random. There are some ridges on the case that support the PCB. This should be useful when changing switches. However, these are not present between the bottom 2 rows, which introduces some inconsistency in where the PCB can bend. Though that's probably not worth worrying about in a tray-mounted keyboard of this size. When the Minivan first came out, it only had to focus on one thing, the layout. At the time, there wasn't many other customs, much less experiments on different mounting styles or focus on sound. And as a product of its time, it's pretty good. The layout is surprisingly usable, and the aluminum cases are pretty nice, but in 2019, I think the Kumo approach is all the value that's left in the Minivan name. There are not many accessible 40% keyboards other than the Vortex Core, and much less in the reasonable quality departments. It's usually those crappy layered FR4 boards where you need to solder a bunch of tiny components or some $400 custom. So if you want to try out a 40% layout, and you very much might want to if your primary use case is non-technical typing, the Kumo is a pretty convenient little kit that lets you bypass a lot of the confusion in building your own keyboard. With the Van Keyboards brand handed off to the key company, it's been said that the intention is to do just this. Offer the Minivan as a complete kit, but I do hope that under new management, they are able to improve on some of the production quality problems that I see on mine.